In this nugget, I'd like to share with you some really cool features that are available to help make sure that our vCenter is up and available whenever we need it. Let's begin. One of the challenges that we have, and everybody has who runs the vCenter server appliance, as we are right here on our ESXi1 host, is that if that host fails, ESXi1, or if there's some catastrophic failure of that virtual machine, we just lost our central management platform for vSphere. And we do have some fault tolerance in place overall in vSphere. We have multiple connections for many of our networks, from the ESXi host to the physical network infrastructure. We've got some multipathing as well for iSCSI access. In our cluster, we can enable high availability for the cluster, and that way if a host fails, the VMs that we're running on that host can go ahead and be restarted over here on another running host. We also have the option of fault tolerance, where we're simultaneously running a VM, for example, on one ESXi host, the primary, and the secondary VM for that fault tolerance machine is running on a second ESXi host. However, none of those solutions on their own are quite good enough for the redundancy and support of the vCenter server appliance. And that's why VMware has a relatively new feature called vCenter HA for high availability, specific for vCenter. And here's how it works. What we're going to do is we're still going to have our active vCenter server appliance. And for our purposes, that's right here on ESXi1. And with vCenter server high availability, we're going to have another vCenter server appliance that's acting as a passive node. And that's going to be running on a separate host. In this example, let's say it's ESXi2. And we're going to add an additional network. Let's say we have the HA network, a brand new network. And with this HA network, we're also going to have an additional Ethernet interface or logical interface on the appliance, both the active and passive nodes regarding that appliance that are keeping track of each other. So you and I, we're still sitting at our management station. We're still connecting over the management network over to the vCenter server appliance at the IP address of 192.168.1.111. That doesn't change, but in the background, we have another network. Let's say we give it the network address of 172.16.1.0 with a 24-bit mask, and maybe we give the active node the .111 address and the passive node a .112 address. And on this HA network, there's going to be replication, so whatever happens on the active is replicated to the configuration on the passive. So that way, if there's a huge failure here on ESXi1, we can go ahead and start up this passive node and start working with it, and once again have access to vCenter for the centralized management of our infrastructure. Now, what if there's a connectivity problem and the passive node can no longer see the active node? Well, the passive device, if it can't see the active, might think, oh my goodness, the active's dead. I need to take on the role of vCenter. However, if it's just a network problem, for example, between the active and passive, and the active is still really running, we do not want two vCenter servers up and active and running. So with vCenter high availability, in addition to having an active and passive node for the vCenter server appliance, there's also a third element referred to as a witness. And it's a node, and ideally, it would run on a third ESXi host. And maybe it would have the address of .113, and it would also have connectivity to that high availability network. And that way we would have a quorum. And a quorum represents a minimum number of entities present. For example, if there was an organization, and the bylaws of the organization said that for any meeting, at least 7 people have to be present, that would represent a quorum of at least 7. Well, in the case of the witness, if the active and passive can't directly see each other, but the witness can see, for example, the passive but can't see the active, that would be another indicator that the active really is unreachable, because the passive can't see him and the witness can't see him. So in vCenter high availability, we're going to have an active, passive, and witness node as part of that high availability for vCenter that are all connected to that high availability network. Now, one of the cool things about the vCenter high availability is that there's a really nice wizard that can assist us in putting all the pieces together. However, no matter how good a wizard is, if we don't have the prerequisites in place, we're not going to have a successful outcome. So let's take a moment and talk about the prerequisites for vCenter high availability. And I have 4 basic categories I want to talk about: the vCenter server appliance, the actual ESXi hosts, the data stores, and the network. So first, regarding the vCenter server appliance, which is required for this all to work, it needs to be running version 6.5, or a more current version would do fine as well. But this feature has been added in vCenter server appliance version 6.5. Now, for the ESXi hosts, they can be running 5.5 or later. So 5.5, 6, 6.5, etc. would be fine. And as far as the quantity, we could get away with 2 hosts to pull this off. However, the recommended number, as far as the minimum goes, is 3 hosts, along with vSphere DRS on the cluster. And that way, with 3 hosts, we can have the active on one, the passive on the other, and the witness node on the third. So 2 hosts are required, and 3 hosts along with DRS is recommended. And as far as data store types, we can use NFS, VMFS, or NAS. They're all supported and tested with vCenter high availability. And for the separate playground that each of these nodes is going to have to communicate with each other, the HA network, which is the high availability network, that needs to be a separate network just for them. Don't borrow, for example, your storage network or vMotion network or VM network, but rather create a separate network just for high availability for vCenter. And the latency between these nodes on that HA network should be less than 10 milliseconds. So for example, if it's 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, that's going to be out of spec for what VMware has specified as the requirements for that HA network, which is less than 10 milliseconds of latency. In this nugget, we've identified some of the basic concepts in vCenter high availability, and in the very next nugget, we'll do a hands-on lab to implement it. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.